Without any further ado, I'll move to our Visionary Keynote to wrap up the conference for the year. And we're going to be hearing from, someone who has been an ambassador for the profession for some time, Björn Edlund, and he'll be talking about corporate public strategy, how to connect with key stakeholders. Björn, in short, has worked over a couple of decades in a previous life for large issues-rich multinationals such as Royal Dutch Shell, ABB Limited and Sandoz AG. And he's since also served as chairman in Europe and CIS at Edelman, and continues to work as a counsellor on corporate public strategy and leadership communications. His focus as a public relations practitioner is the role of business in society. He's a visiting fellow at the Henley Business School and a trustee of the Institute of Human Rights and Business. And he's involved with initiatives concerning quality journalism and freedom of expression. So please welcome Björn, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much for having me. I think that in any enterprising person's life there are three phases. So you have a phase that should go on your entire life, which is your learn phase. And you have a phase that starts at a certain point and goes on for as long as it has to, which is your earn phase. And then you have a phase that you should start as early as possible and continue your entire life, which is your return phase. So this is my turn phase talk today. And behaviors is really what matters, yeah? And what we do really, thinking about the question that came into the panel, if somebody asks me, what did you do when you were head of PR? I call it PR because that's what it is, okay? We can discuss titles later. I said, we help the leadership think things through. And everything else flows from there. You can add a stupidity filter, you can come up with ideas, you can do all sorts of things, right? The other thing that I find fascinating when we talk about storytelling, and that's sort of been one of the topics here, and my idea there is that people actually bond over beliefs and values. They will listen with their hearts, and if you connect with them, they will respond to your facts and arguments, but in that order, okay? So, this is not a new discipline we're talking about here. This is from a speech that Arthur Page made in 1939 on industrial statesmanship. All business begins with a public permission and exists by public approval. Pretty good, huh? This is why the society is named after him, because he's a smart thinker. If you want to read his speeches, there is a Page Center. If you Google Page Center, you will find there's a university, I think it's Penn State, that has a Page Center. Okay, he was the first VP of PR who was to be on the executive board at AT&T, and he was a very influential guy. And this is 1927. We still talk about a seat at the table. He had one. He was actually a member of the board as well. Okay, three things: understanding the world we're in, exploring the role of business in society, and building a corporate strategy. So here's a really big picture from a conference of futurologists in 1999 in Copenhagen, looking at the societies, the different societies we've had: hunter and gatherer, agriculture, industrial, information, and dream society, they called it, and the units that were important: the tribe, the family, hierarchy, networks, and so on, the playing field, the hero, and the value. And they said we're about here in 99. You think of 99, to understand that stakeholders will fragment into tribes, to understand that the environment will be themed. If in 99, if somebody had been staring into his phone all day, you would have called a doctor, right? There was some of it, right? And you ever go anywhere that you don't have somebody who has themed the environment for you? Everybody lives in their second life. You know, the kids spend. My wife says to me, when I look at my cell phone at dinner, it's nice that you're here, but it would be better if you were present. And that's that sort of themed environment we're in. And the elder was the storyteller, and the storytellers come back. I actually think that PR is probably the world's third oldest profession. We know what the oldest one is. I think the second profession was the enforcer, and the third one was the spin doctor, who would tell stories and make sure the king looked good, or the tribal chief. And the experience as a value is what we're getting out of this themed environment, because we're living in the attention economy. So if you want to connect with people in the attention economy, we need to know what the purpose of the company is. I was very delighted to hear so much talk about purpose here. It's a funny, mad world we're in. So the green here means that you can be sure of sanctity of contracts. You can be sure you can get legal redress if something goes wrong in your business dealings. You can make sure that the government isn't corrupt. You can make sure that the civil service is not corrupt. To do business around the world is actually a pretty risky and dangerous thing. This is a thought. You probably recognize these two guys. It's from a graffiti in the Ukraine. No, in Lithuania, I'm sorry, and I couldn't resist using it. And I have this idea that we're driven by these two forces, globalization, which we talked about a lot here, and the problem is we don't really have a really global political institution to deal with the political problem. The problems like climate change and migration and so on, it's all still done in national and regional silos. The other problem we have is that power now lies with companies. I mean, the Edlund Trust Barometer has for a long time had business better trusted than government, and that's actually a bad thing. It would be much better if government was trusted more than business, because we have regulators, because at the same time people say they want government to regulate business, okay? Economic forces are creating great progress, but also these challenges of inequality and vulnerability. When the backlash is these guys, right? And Le Pen and, right? And tribalization is this thing I talked about, how people bond over shared religious beliefs or cultural identities and political convictions. And what happens there is that the old paradigm, when we thought think global, act local, was the ultimate thing to aim for when you're constructing communication strategies or even business strategies. So a 40-60, here is a strong central core, and then you adapt locally. The slogan actually comes from the American leftist student movement, the Student for Democratic Society in the 1960s. But it works, right? So I think what we're doing today is we're here. We have to obviously be able to be in both places, both there and there. But how can we construct the way that we deal with the business strategy, with the communication strategy, with the implementation around the world to connect with all these tribes you have? When I have a friend who is a CFO in a company in Switzerland who is also a rower. So with his Concept 2 rower, he plugs into the internet in Zurich, and he runs races with people in Melbourne and Sao Paulo and Beijing online. That's one of his many tribes. He's also a father, he's a football player, he goes to church. And but from the old mainstream, where we sort of sat in 3 or 4 categories of demography, we splintered. And communicating in that world is difficult. How do you find the tribes? So here's a slide that I've used in ABB in 2000 to have the CEO explain to the management team why we should start a sustainability function, not just talk about the environment. And he also wanted us to join the UN Global Compact. ABB was one of the first companies to join it. So when it works well, this is how business contributes. We heard about this before. And the one thing I like is the words from Kofi Annan, who's one of the wisest men I've ever met. If we cannot make globalization work for all, in the end, it will work for no one. And this is what, 16 years ago now? So one of the approaches you can take is listen to the guy who replaced Richard at the Body Shop, John Morrison, who also happens to be the executive director of this institute, which I helped create and I'm now a proud trustee of. He's written a book called The Social License, How to Keep Your Organization Legitimate. And he says, you need a legal license, you need a political license, but you also need to make sure that you get your social license from the community and from the other people who will pressure you if you don't do the stuff right. And the one phrase in the book, is a wonderful book, go buy it. The one phrase in the book that really stuck with me is that companies have to understand when they go into an area, like Shell going into Alaska, where they failed to understand this because they're now pulled out. Or when ABB built, a power dam or helped build a power dam in Merovi in Egypt, and they have to understand the pre-existing social contract. The pre-existing social contract. What real and perceived rights do people have where you are? Has any one of you heard of ExxonMobil's pipeline project in the Chad? I think not. Because what they did, They sent in a team of anthropologists a couple of years before they went there with the first engineer to make sure they understood the pre-existing social contract all along the pipeline route. So the only story that ever was written about this pipeline was the story about how they'd done it in the New York Times, how smart they were to have that approach. Instead of sending in a hard-ass engineer from Texas, like we did in Alaska, who goes to the government and gets permission and doesn't understand the values and customs of the Inuits, whose lives these offshore drilling rigs would have had an impact on. They were afraid, the Inuits were afraid, and I'm not knocking Shell because I was part of this stuff. Nobody gets it right. The Inuits have as a manhood ritual that they do whaling. Okay, they're allowed to do whaling in the traditional way. 8 guys in a boat, go out on the ice. The smallest guy goes up in something called a tossing blanket. They toss him up. If you can see a whale spouting, they raise in the boat, a hand harpoon, boom, and they pull the boat in. They were afraid that if you put drilling rigs out there, the whales would migrate further out, and they couldn't have that very important ritual of whaling. So the pre-existing social contract. One thing that I find useful about the Page Society is that one of the studies that was done around corporate character and building shared belief has this kind of wheel in it. First, you engage decision makers or the stakeholder to forge a shared belief. So if you had understood what the values were in Alaska, you could have actually had a conversation and said, well, actually, we can see how we can work here without becoming a threat to your culture. Can you make them act on that belief? Can you increase their confidence that the action matters? And can you then build advocacy at scale? So here is a slide that I call Bert's gas factory. I doodled on a flip chart, and we put up a thing about brand and reputation in Shell. So brand is who we are and what we stand for. Here's the important piece, the stakeholder will. Stakeholders are driven by their trust, fears, hopes, self-interests, and so on and so forth. The way we manifest the brand is through communications, behavior, and performance. And then it comes out the other end and you have a reputation. But it will look different. Because what happens in the stakeholder universe will be different. And too many companies spend too much time to the left of the diagram thinking about what we should be saying about ourselves rather than engaging and going out. Because what happens in that universe, the stakeholders. And of course today you have social media overlaid and all of that. And you can measure it. And what comes out at the end is your reputation dividend. Will they help you? Will they stop you? Okay. You can't hug a company, but you can embrace its values. And here's how that works from a scientific point of view. First, you have the facts, when people have views based on facts and know-how, and conflicts will center on the facts. The engineers in the company will love that because they like to discuss facts. But then you have the psychological reality level, where views are based on experiences and conflict centers on trust and interest. And then the real hard nut, where conflicts center on values and views on life. There are 2 academics in Germany who came up with this. I think it's quite a useful way of thinking about it. So how do you build a corporate public strategy? This is what the CCO has to play with. You can reach into your company, you can reach into the sector, you can reach into the C-suite, you can reach into the CEO, and you can work with the business community. And of course, this is just inside the business tent somehow. But it's important to think that you can do all these things. And you can do them well, especially well, I think, if you keep a certain distance. You should never become the CEO's guy, okay? You should never get involved with political struggles inside the company. You should keep your distance, because that's when the value of your advice would be best accepted. And if there's a change of CEO, you can still stay. At ABB, we had 4 CEOs in 7 years. They asked, either he knows a deep and dark secret, which I didn't, or he's, I don't know, he knows something the other people don't. Who knows, right? So, societal intelligence. So here's the idea I have, is that we need a dynamic IQ and strategy to come up with good business plans and do our work well. Leaders need to have an emotional intelligence quotient, which is quite high, to bond with people and relate with people. And I think they need to have what I call societal intelligence to act and see and act on the company's challenges and opportunities in the broader world, which I'm talking about here now. Can you understand what drives opinion? Can you shape a compelling and inviting narrative? Can you mitigate risk by taking into account stakeholder concerns? Can you appeal to your customers as citizens through the way that you communicate and engage with them? And are you able and willing to form constructive and at times surprising alliances? So here is the slide, because you need a slide, right, when you're doing models. And the two categories, clue and glue, come from an answer I gave to the question of a new CEO who started when he was the chairman and then became CEO in ABB because the old one threw the towel in. He came down and he said, can you describe the situation we're in? I said, yes, we are the glueless led by the clueless. The clue is obviously strategy, what we do and how we do it, and the glue is the culture, who we are and what we stand for, and purpose is why we exist. And you can plot the IQ, the EQ, and the SQ in there. The purpose word is the most important one. So if you want a model to do a diagnosis of your brand, you can use this. We got it at Shell from a planner called Rob Alexander from J.W. Thompson. We went to GE and said, how did you do it? Because there's a CEO change. How did you do that stuff when Emil took over from the iconic Jack Welch? And then we plotted it on this from GE's moving to imagination at work. So corporate internal is culture. So what are the things you put in there? Your values, the leadership training programs, all that sort of stuff. Internal and product is obviously R&D and innovation. External and corporate is your stakeholder engagement. And external and product is your customer marketing. You can use it and put purpose in the middle as well. And you'll find a way to test your purpose. It's actually quite a useful little thing. Storytelling, a few words about storytelling. Horman Arantz, the storytelling person. This actually comes from my compatriot who writes about repressed detectives, Henning Mankell. He said, what differentiates us from animals, we can listen to other people's dreams, fears, joys, sorrows, defeats, and they in turn can listen to ours. So I think storytelling creates meaning and it creates community and it creates space for the business to grow if it's done well. In my return phase, can I kind of become a little bit personal and tell you about my own leadership principles before we take some questions? I've stole about half of them, copied, whatever, learned from other people about half of them, and some of them I created myself, and I changed the definitions and so on and so forth. So it is really something that I tried to live by. Where I started it in ABB, I didn't have the guts to do this, but in Shell sometimes I would put these up and I will say to my team, is this the way that I act with you? And if it isn't, call me out on it, all right? Operate with complete integrity. Keep your word and do the right thing, and even if you're the only one who knows you're doing it. Become an expert in your field. Expert power provides one of the major sources of authority because people will follow those who know their stuff. Tell people what you expect. Use clear language to describe goals, values, and expected behaviors. Develop a plan and act on it. Listen for feedback that may signal the need for change in tactics or even in strategy. Mean it when you commit. You'll inspire people if you show them you expect the risks that commitment brings. You do that by sticking to your path in adversity and solving problems that may seem impossible to others. Expect the best. Maintain a self-confident vision of what you want, success, and not a negative vision of you what you don't want, possible failure. Positive thinking has power, but only if it's fueled with enthusiasm. Care for those you lead. Put their needs at the top of your priority list. If things go wrong, take two things, charge and responsibility. Never pass the blame. And when things go right, share two things, the recognition and the rewards. Put others first. Think of those you lead before yourself. Celebrate their success by giving them as much credit as possible. And share their pain even if it's inconvenient, difficult, or costly in time, money, or other resources. Do what the world lead implies. Get out in front. Play to your own strengths. Learn how to compensate your weaknesses. Let your team members understand how you rely on them and why. Don't assume you know everything or that you're always right. Keep a sense of perspective. Strive for broad-based solutions. Take the time to resolve differences. No one gains if you leave only wreckage in your path. And finally, one strong character versus 140 characters, okay? And this is what engagement is all about. Yeah? Thank you.